Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am sharing two projects that uses this is actually last year's Penny Black Frozen Vista. There's two scenes here, a nature scene and a town scene. And then I'm also using something that's brand new that's called Viewpoint, and it is a frame that gives you kind of a window look. It does have cuts it into 4 quadrants, and then it has the little pieces that give it some dimension. Now, I took a piece of scrap paper and I just made a sample because I want to have kind of as a template. And you can see those 2 pieces in each quadrant that fit in there to give it make it look like you're looking through a window. But first I'm going to start out with a piece of hot pressed watercolor paper. This is 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm taking some of my soft soap, you've seen me do this before, to my brush, and I'm massaging it into the bristles. Now I went ahead of time, and my paper is already splattered with masking fluid for my snow parts, but I will need this brush to put a moon in there. But I have that all prepared. Now here is my template against my hot press watercolor paper where I've splattered it with the masking fluid and I've let it dry completely. And now very lightly I'm making a pencil outline of each of these 4 quadrants. You don't have to worry about erasing it or anything like that, because once we get done it will just completely be disappear. But if something got a little bit dark or you slipped or something, you can just take an eraser like I'm doing here and just lighten it or erase it away. Now I've got that done. And we've prepped our brush. As you remember, it has the liquid soap in it. I am now just making a moon. And if you've followed any of my videos before, you know that I start out small with the circle and then I just keep getting bigger and bigger. And I'm making sure that I have enough masking fluid. It doesn't have to go on there super thick, but you want it thick enough that it does make a nice mask. So we're going to be watercoloring this, and this is why I'm not using masking paper. I'm using masking fluid, because masking fluid creates this like a rubber little mask there, so the watercolor doesn't go underneath. Now I'm taking, you can see I have that kind of template where that was, and I'm kind of getting an idea where to place that town one. We're going to use the town one. And I know it has those lines in it that gives it that arch, but we're going to ignore that. And I have some VersaFine ink, and now I'm using the little cube. You can use the full pad if you want. I'm using just this little cube, and I'm being very careful. This part, and it doesn't take very long at all, is where you need to be your little detailed self. You want to be very careful not to get any ink on that arch part of the stamp that we don't want. Now, some of it invariably is going to get on there. So this is my little dispenser of alcohol. I love this, the little medical dispenser. And I've taken a Q-tip and I have just the tiniest bit of alcohol. And I do kind of squeeze it off a little bit before I touch it to the ink, because you don't want it to kind of flood the area, because it will blur the ink. You want it to just be enough that it'll take off that ink where you might have touched that arch area that we're trying to avoid. Right now, we just want the trees, and that's why this little cube works out so nicely. And then I've taken my Q-tip again, and I'm just wiping that down. I'm using a facial tissue to kind of help me with that as well. And I'm just stamping that now. I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx because it is a waterproof ink. And so when we go and do the sky, it'll work out wonderfully, actually. So now I'm going to be doing the buildings here that are on the other side of this, and I'm doing the same thing, that I'm taking my little Q-tip that's very lightly moistened with alcohol and rubbing alcohol, and I making sure that I don't have any of that arch part that has any ink on it. I'm just gently taking that off. You saw me just kind of scratch that one little area, and that was because I took off a little bit of that masking fluid that was on a building. It was kind of a lot, and so I decided that I wanted to take that off. Yeah, I was just scratching it off with my fingernail. And now I'm just stamping it again, and I'm getting it nice and black. Now, you can see that there's gaps in this, but you don't have to worry about that because the frame is going to cover over it, and that's what makes this particular stamp so great. There's another thing that makes this stamp so great. It is in perfect proportion to the having that window frame over the top, and that's one of the chief reasons I use that. Now, you saw that I used a Pigma marker, a Micron Pigma marker, which is waterproof too, and I just kind of fluffed out those trees a little bit with I am not an artist, so it's easy for you to do. You can just make a few little lines just to give a little bit more dimension to the tree. Now I have put smushed on chipped sapphire, black soot, wild honey, and antique linen onto my mat. That's what I'm going to use for watercoloring. I've now put clean water in all the sky area. Careful not to touch the snow area. You know, with watercolor, it's only going to go where it's damp or wet, and so only moisten those areas where you want the ink to go. And I'm just putting some antique linen down there at the bottom. I'll add a little bit of wild honey. I did smush on some worn lipstick, but just ignore that because I'm not going to be using that at all. Now I'm taking a mixture of the chipped sapphire and the black soot, and I'm starting to add that to the top part of the sky. Now I make this very, very watery. You don't want to have, unless you want your sky and the paint to really grab, you want to make sure it's very watery, and then just keep adding layers because that will give you your depth and it'll help you control the color. Because you probably don't see how watery that is, but it really is, where I've mixed the blue and the black together in the proportions. Now I'll start to add, see, I'm adding more wild honey down at the bottom just to brighten it up a little bit. And I'll add more blue now because I'll brighten up the sky a little bit. The blue and the black give you a really nice blue gray, but if you want a little bit more blue like I'm adding now, I add a little bit more chipped sapphire. Now these are the regular distress inks. I am not using oxide inks here at all. So I am just darkening, especially going around the outside because I want it kind of glowy around my moon. Because it's a night scene, and anyway, that's what moons are so bright, that they do have a glowy area that gives it more of a realistic feel, and it also gives it more dimension and more drama when you add some dark on the sides, and that's what I've done. So you see how dark that's gotten, and now I'm just taking wild honey and I'm just touching it into those windows. I'm not going to make every window have a light in it, but just give it just a touch of wild honey color in there, just using a small brush. And once those are all touched, have a little show like they have a little light in them, then I'm going to go on to the next step. So now I'm going to take this pen again. This is the Micron Pigment pen. These are waterproof. This is why I use them. And I'm just drawing in, just completing that line of the snowbank. And then I'm taking that mixture of blue and black again, very, very, very watery on this one. You want it to be extremely watery. And I'm just lightly adding some shadow for the snowbanks. Again, just to give it a little bit more dimension, I'm coloring the snowbanks and underneath the trees, and I'm just adding just a tiny bit. I'm not using a lot. It's just a little bit of accent here and there, but leaving most of it white. And then I'm going to take my template again and kind of look at it and say, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. By the way, you notice that the moon I made sure fit in the two top quadrants, so it still peeked into the one on the left, and then you see the moon on the right too. I just wanted it not all in one place. And now I let that all dry before I did this. Be sure you do that. And now I'm just rubbing off that masking fluid. Now you can see that on the moon, I'm going to have to get a rubber eraser and erase that all with the moon, the rest of it. It's not coming off as well with me rubbing it, but this is the rubber eraser and it just took it right off. And I'm going to just make sure that the whole panel, I had lots of splattered masking fluid on this one, which turned out great because see all of that kind of snowy look. Now I'm just taking my pen again and just sharpening up any areas that I need to sharpen up the black. Now I'm going to just take a little bit of that antique linen and maybe a tiny, I think I'll kind of stick with the antique linen. I'm just going lightly around the moon. I could have left it white. White is also very, very pretty, but I added just a little bit there. Now that is completely dry, doesn't take long, I'm using my template again and I'm putting that up there, and I've got the Santa reindeer and his sleigh to stamp in there. And so I'm kind of just positioning it. You can see I have it at a sharp angle, and the reason is because I want it to fit into the first top quadrant as closely as I can. I'm using that template to get the position, and now I'm going to do the same thing. Is very carefully use my VersaFine ink. Now this is the part that this tiny bit is a little bit fiddly, and it's easy to touch those areas where that arch is. So you need to be really careful and use that Q-tip with the alcohol in it. Again, don't flood your kind of squeeze out your Q-tip before you touch it there, so that it's just lightly moistened with the alcohol. But if you want to be really exacting, use like a marker, like a Tombow black marker. The Tombow black markers work wonderfully on rubber stamps. They don't work as well with a clear stamp. That's why I didn't use them here. It just means that you have to go over it and over it. So I love the VersaFine ink, so I tried that because it's nice and black and waterproof. But in retrospect, I maybe would have used the Tombow marker, because that way I could be even more precise. Now there's little parts, because this one does have that arch going through this sleigh and reindeer, that you're going to have to take a marker and you're going to have to fill it in. But it's just a few lines, and if I can do it, you can do it, because I am not an artist, but I just kind of filled it in and faked it in, and it's pretty easy to do. You just fill it out with the body and that one little leg, and that's really all that you have to do. And now you have Santa and his sleigh with reindeer going up in the sky. And now I have my tried and true Dr. P.H. Martin bleed-proof white ink. You saw that I squirted a little bit of water in there because sometimes the moisture evaporates a tiny bit and it gets a little thick. So I put a little bit in there, not too much. I like to squirt it in there and not pour any water in there because that way I can really control the water. And I splattered lots of snow on there. Then I took my viewpoint die here. I cut it 4 times from Nina white cardstock. Here are all my pieces. And the reason why I have 4 is because I want to stack it just like I did. So now I've taken all 4 of these apart. And 4 actually seems to be the magic number. It really worked out very nicely. And I'm just putting some liquid glue right on top of one another. And going to town, stacking and gluing all 4 of these on top of one another. This is going to give me my dimension, and I don't need to use any foam tape then, and it makes it much, much less fiddly. Now there are those pieces that you see stacked up there. I will need, see how that white, I really like how the white looks, and there's these little sticks, so to speak, that fit inside there. I need 4 long ones and 4 short ones. The short ones go horizontally and the tall ones go vertically. The tall ones, I'm taking black soot and I am just blending on some black soot ink. You can just cut this with black paper. I happen to like that this gives you just a little bit different look. And then now for the gray, it's really easy to do. I'm just very lightly not adding any more ink and just lightly touching it with the gray. So now I have a piece of, it's called hydrangea. It's a beautiful gray blue, and it is 4.5 by 6 3/4. And I'm just placing this all kind of in place because I'm going to stamp the sentiment. This sentiment happens to come with the set, and I am using my anti-static powder. I've positioned it in my stamp positioner, and I'm using Versamark ink, and I'm inking this up, and I'm going to white emboss it. I just put all of that frame and the picture there to get an idea where that should go. So now I'm going to sprinkle the white embossing powder and heat set it here. This is the magic part where it all melts. And I am now placing it with a little, I'm using double stick tape here, but you can use glue, and putting it right on top of a white card base that's the same dimension of 4.5 by 6 3/4 when folded. And then I am taking a little bit of liquid glue. I use liquid glue for the watercolor paper because it sticks those corners. I make sure I get those corners in there. It sticks it down really flat, and that's what I want it to do. I don't want any of the warping showing. I'm just kind of, the other reason is I can move glue around a little bit. The double stick tape, which I love, does not allow you to move it around. And that's when I'm wanting to position this, glue is the way to go because you can move it around. And now I'm just placing more glue around my frame that I've made, and I'm sticking that down. Now I'm nearly done, but I've got to add in my pieces that fit inside this frame to give it more dimension. So remember, I have my black and my gray ones. I'm adding the skinniest piece of foam tape, and I'm just putting it on the long side so it fits right up against the white frame, and I'm not making sure that it doesn't go all the way to the other edge to the inside. That way I can push it down and kind of miter it in, so to speak. That's kind of hard to explain, but just make your strips very, very thin and just place them very close to the outer edge that fits inside against that white frame. So that completed it, and I just think that that's wonderful, and you'll see a close-up here in a minute. But I want to show you, I did make one off screen using the nature scene. Now this one for the sky, I used Brusho, it's Ultramarine Brusho, paint, which I love. That gives you that vibrancy. And then I used some markers, some distress markers. I used espresso to just outline the deer, and then some forest moss, and then a little bit of peeled paint for the trees. And I just very carefully inked those up and made it exactly the same way, but this gives you a little bit different view. And I mounted it on pale rose paper, and then stamped the sentiment with weather vane. I've put all of those in the supply list, which you can click the link down below. And then here's the one that I demonstrated. You can let me know which one that you prefer. I love them both. This was really up my alley. These are things that I just love the most, is making things like this with a nature scene, or this very cute city scene with Santa flying up in the sky. That's a perfect Christmas card for me. So I'm just in review. I used Frozen Vista by Penny Black and Penny Black Viewpoint die, and then you can check out all the other supplies that I used. Like I mentioned, the link is down below, and it'll take you also to look at some more close-ups, and there's Oodle's more inspiration. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure, and I will see you next time. Bye.